Hi, I'm Beth from So Country, and today's tutorial is for this clear vinyl pouch. This is called the LPQ pouch, and there are many versions similar to this, but I'm going to go over this one because I think this is a great way to get started working with clear vinyl if you're not used to working with clear vinyl. The reason why I think this is a great pouch for beginners when you're getting used to working with clear vinyl is because you use a small amount of clear vinyl and you create a fabric frame around it. Once you create that fabric frame around it, you're just going to treat it like a regular piece of fabric. It's going to be a lot easier to work with. Your machine's not going to be sewing on the clear vinyl, so you have less issues with it. Also, this project is perfect for your PVC vinyl. PVC vinyl is a little bit stiffer than your TPU, but it is a lot cheaper. Probably about 50% cheaper depending on where you shop for it. Also, it uses a very little amount of clear vinyl, so you can start off with a scrap or something small and you don't have to worry about messing it up. You will not have any problem sewing this pouch, whether you're using a domestic, a higher end domestic or a lower end domestic or an industrial. This pattern works for everyone. And while I am going to be showing you the binding method, you can also birth this pouch, and I will tell you at what point that you would deviate from what I'm doing and how to do it. It's super simple. It doesn't take any time to sew this pouch up. So let's go ahead and get started looking at the pieces we will need for this pouch. We will need one piece of clear vinyl. I'm choosing to use vinyl from J&R Edwards. They are having a big drop of all kinds of clear vinyl, so this is what I'm using. Like I said, PVC is a little bit stiffer than the TPU. This PVC works perfectly because you can see whenever I fold it, do you see, I don't know if you can see this on camera, but see how it creates kind of a curve here instead of a sharp point? That lets you know that whenever you're sewing it around curves, if you would be, which you're not in this pattern, it's going to be easier to bend and easier to fold. So that's a quick test you can do to see what kind of patterns you can use your clear vinyl in. So one piece of clear vinyl. Then we will have 4 of our top and bottom window pieces. One will be our exterior for the top, one will be our exterior for the bottom, and then these 2 will be our lining. So that's the start of our frame. Then we have the side pieces for the frame. We would have 1 exterior on each side and then 2 for our lining. Then you will put your zipper. Follow the pattern to tell you how long to cut it exactly, because we will be adding zipper tabs. After we have the zipper, we will have one more top piece. This piece right here, if you want, this is the perfect place if you would want to add grommets or one grommet for it, like to make it a wristlet, but the pattern does tell you that you could use this in a binder. As you see on mine, I did not do that. I didn't feel the need to, but you could easily. The last thing you will need for the big pattern pieces is 2 of these. One will be the inside. So it would be what you would see when you looked at your pouch, and the other piece will be the back side. So when you flip it over, what you would see on the back. I am using this, it's called a vinyl, but it's more like a suede almost. So I don't need to do any interfacing at all. If you're using a cotton woven, you would want to interface everything with a medium weight interfacing, which would be a SF101, or what I use is Royal Pixie Light, whatever your preference is. That is the only interfacing you really need if you're making the pouch like I am. If you want to add the grommets in the top, you would want to add a little bit more of a heavy stabilizer, maybe a Decaville Light up here in this top portion, just so the grommets have something to grab onto and won't rip whenever you're like turning in the binder. Another thing you want, if you wanted, you could add a piece of fusible fleece on the back piece of this pouch. I didn't feel it needed it. I felt like it had, the exact structure that I wanted. I wanted it a little bit floppy. I wanted it smooth and everything like that. but the fleece would give it a little bit better of a stable feel. If you like that, you could definitely add that, no problems. The last thing you need for this pouch, if you're choosing to bind it like I am, is the binding. I have not decided on my binding yet. I'm going to wait till I see how the pouch looks and then choose it based on what I feel the pouch can need as a contrast. If you're going to birth this, you don't need the binding, and that's all you need. Super simple, super quick. This pouch maybe it takes about an hour to cut out. There is not any pattern pieces. It is a cut and measure pattern, and then probably about an hour to sew. Now, of course, this may vary based on how you sew and how things go for you, but I feel like it's a really quick project to come together. So let's go ahead and get started creating this and see how quickly it comes together. I'm going to put all these pieces aside and we will get to sewing. So I'm going to do a few things differently with this pattern. The first step the pattern calls is to work on the zipper, but we're going to work on the frame first. I feel like that just makes more sense for me to do it that way. The frame is super simple to make. We're going to pull out our clear piece of vinyl and our 4 side panels. The way I'm going to do mine is I'm going to take my exterior and I'm going to place it right sides down onto my clear vinyl. I'm going to go ahead and put 2 clips in place here. If you want to avoid the clips, you could base this step, but I just felt like this went just as quickly and easily, and where it's such a short distance, it wasn't a problem at all to do it this way. After I have my exterior clipped on right sides together, I flip it over. Since my material is not directional, I don't have to worry about it, but definitely make sure you orientate your material if it is directional the right way. So I go ahead and I place my lining piece right sides with the vinyl, and then I add an extra clip on the end before I move the other clip, and that way I don't have any shifting. I find sometimes if I start moving the clips already made, the vinyl will shift because it is kind of slick. So that's just a little tip I do. We're going to sew this piece on. I'm going to sew from the right side. I'm going to sew with the seam allowance given in the pattern. I'm going to make sure I lock in my stitches at the top and the bottom. The only thing I really need to do extra when I'm working with this is I don't want this clear vinyl to be laying on the bed of my machine when I can prevent it, because it'll kind of stick at times. Thankfully, this vinyl's not a sticky one, but that's a tip that I always do no matter what clear vinyl I'm working with, is to not let it drag or stick onto the bed of my machine. So I usually will either roll it or just kind of hold it up while I'm sewing anything with it. So let's go ahead and get started sewing this edge on with the seam allowance given in the pattern. Now that I've got that sewn, I'm simply going to pull these wrong sides together. I'm going to make sure I match up these edges and I'm going to use my other clips. They're a little bit better for this step. If I don't put these edges together, it seems like they want to shift, and sometimes you can even see the lining poking through, and I really don't want that. So this just helps me to make sure I keep everything connected the way I want to. When I take this over the machine and sew it, I'm going to sew 1/8 of an inch away from that edge I just sewed. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to keep this pulled so that I can get a good, even sew down this vinyl edge here and keep everything connected together, and so it looks great at the end. And we got the first side sewn on. I'm going to trim my threads, and then I'm going to repeat that same exact process for this other side. So now we have both of the side pieces on this clear piece of vinyl. So to finish the frame, we're going to add the top and the bottom. We're going to do that the exact same way, but I do want to make one point when we're talking about the top. After we have the top on, we're going to attach our zipper right here. The way I'm going to do it is the way I've done it in previous videos. I'm going to have the zipper tape just a little bit above this vinyl, so when I turn it, that zipper tape will kind of hide the raw edge of the vinyl or the cotton if you're using that. If you do not like that method, if you want to not see any raw edges, even of just your zipper tape, what you could do is you could cut this piece just 1/4 of an inch taller, and then you could use double-sided tape, or if it's just a cotton, you could just iron and fold it down 1/4 of an inch. That would give you a finished edge on your top exterior, and you would do the same thing for your top lining. Then what you would do is you would just slip your zipper tape down there and top stitch across. If you have any confusion on that, and if you don't like the way I did this, just let me know. Leave me a comment and we can go through it and talk about it in more detail. But I just want to point that out, that there is a way to do it differently than the way I'm doing it if you don't like that method. Let's go ahead and get going with my method though, and I'm just going to do everything the exact same. My exterior, if yours is directional, put it like this so you know which way you want it to look in the end, and then flip it down so the right sides are touching. Add just a few clips to kind of keep that stabilized there in place. You could baste right here if you wanted to. I am not going to. I am just going to flip it over and then add my lining right sides together with that exterior piece. The right side of the vinyl is touching the wrong side of this clear vinyl. So now let's add a clip on the ends to keep that from shifting, and then we'll just slip these clips over. We're going to sew this again with that seam allowance given in the pattern. Make sure you backstitch when you start and stop sewing this. Now that we have this sewn together, we're going to top stitch. The way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to pull these two pieces, the two top pieces together. Wrong sides are going to be together. Add a little clip there at the top just to keep those connected. And on this part, you do tend to have, like I said before, that lining trying to creep through, and you will be able to see it. It doesn't bother me so much if it does show a little, but I do try to pull the top part away from the clear vinyl so I can get a good stitch on it whenever I'm top stitching, so that I see less of that lining. It just wants to slide down a little. Okay, so now I have that clipped. I'm going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away and just pulling that vinyl as I go. Okay, now I have the top of this frame attached. I'm going to repeat these same steps to attach the bottom, and then I will clear up if I have any kind of little overhang here. I will square that up and get that trimmed up, and then we will be done with the frame. I have my frame completed around my clear vinyl. It looks gorgeous, and so now it's time to set this aside and get our zipper prepped so we can attach it. We're pretty much, I would say, halfway done with this because we just have a few more steps depending on which method you're choosing for your finishing. So cut your zipper to the measurements given in the pattern, and then go ahead and add your zipper pull, and then we are going to attach the zipper tabs just like you would any other zipper tabs, and we will remeasure the zipper and then cut it down again if you need to, trim it I should say, to the specific and final measurements given in the pattern. So we have 4 zipper tabs, exteriors, and linings. You're just going to do a zipper sandwich with them. Put your exterior right sides down, matching up those raw edges, and then go ahead and take your lining piece and put it right sides together with the other zipper tab. So both of the tabs will be right sides together. Make sure you have your pull on before doing this step, or you will get frustrated and have to seam rip it. Sew your zipper tabs to the zipper tape with the seam allowance given in the pattern. Once you have those sewn together, you're simply going to pull them back, wrong sides together, and then top stitch along that edge you just sewn. I'm going to keep a kind of like not super tight but a firm pull on that to keep it tight and flush, and so they stay the same size and length whenever I'm top stitching. Now that I have that top stitch, I'm going to trim my tabs to make them flush with my zipper tape, and then I'm going to repeat the same thing with my 2 remaining tabs on the other side. So I went ahead and added both tabs to the zipper tape and top stitched the tabs. I also used the final measurement given in the pattern and just trimmed down evenly on both sides the tabs so that it fit that measurement. Now it's time to add this to the pouch. If you remember in the beginning of the video, I talked a little bit about the different ways to do this. For me, honestly, I could just sew this regularly, having this zipper tape lined up evenly because my edges are not going to fray. But I really don't like the way that looks. So the way I'm going to do mine is, instead of having these 2 pieces right here, the top edges of the frame flush with my zipper tape, I'm going to shift my zipper tape about an 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch up. So from the back side, you will just be, and I'll be sewing it from this back side, and I'll just want to see that zipper tape just barely poking out. Because after I sew it that way, when I flip it down and top stitch, you can see that the zipper tape will then encase those raw edges. That's the way I'm going to do it. Like I mentioned, you could also fold both of these edges down. And let me just show you what that will look like. Let's put a clip or 2 in here. And just to give you a visual on that in case you choose that option. And this is just a rough way that it looks. Yours would look, of course, a lot neater. You could use double-sided tape to fold both of those edges down. And then you would just nest that zipper in there. And then you would just do a top stitch across to connect everything. So 2 different ways to do this. I'm going to go ahead and go forward with my method. I want my zipper to close to the left, so I have it orientated that way, and then I simply flip it down. I'm not going to use clips on this because, well, let me lie and say I will use clips on the sides. Let's put some clips in on the sides to keep that centered there. But what I'm going to do is when I get to the machine, I'll take this clip out and I'll make sure that I pull that zipper tape and just sew with it being consistently about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch above this top panel here. So when I'm doing this, my zipper tape will be what I align with my seam allowance guide. So I'll still sew with that seam allowance, but it'll just be the zipper tape that is lining up on that mark on my sewing machine. Make sure you back stitch when you start and stop on this step as well. After you attach your zipper to this panel here, what you're going to do is you're going to do what you typically do and just flip it down. Your seam allowance will be going down, and if you did it my method, your zipper tape will cover up all your raw edges. So now what I'm going to do is I will just top stitch along that edge I just sewn with the 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I'll make sure when I'm doing that I'm kind of feeling and making sure that the zipper tape is going down, that seam allowance with the zipper tape is going down. So now I have the zipper attached to the vinyl, and then we just have to attach that top piece. Now this is the piece that if you are choosing to add the grommets, yours will be stabilized with a heavy stabilizer if you want. Also with this piece, I don't have to worry about having my zipper tape over this piece because whenever I attach this to the back, I'm going to top stitch it to the lining and it will be encased. So you can sew this exactly like you would normally with the zipper tape and that top panel piece flush and even. So you're going to go ahead and sew this on, back stitching when you start and stop, making sure your sides are aligned and mine are not, and use this seam allowance given in the pattern for this step. Okay, now I have that attached, and all we have to do now is pull these apart. But on this one, I'm going to have the seam allowance going up. So if you can iron your materials, you can iron them and have that seam going up. Or if you want, you could use double-sided tape. I'm not going to worry about it so much because I think I can manage it while I'm sewing it. But what you'll do now is you can go ahead and take out that lining piece, and you're going to match everything up. By that I mean all your edges. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add clips all the way around this pouch to clip these two together, and then I will come back and we will go through those steps and sew that up, and we're almost done. So I have my front panel with the vinyl clipped to the lining for this pouch, and I just clipped around the edges. Now since I'm using a thicker fabric, mine's kind of not laying completely flat. So what I'll have to do is whenever I'm sewing or top stitching this edge here, I'll have to be constantly checking to make sure everything's laying flat, and so that I catch that seam properly. If you're using cotton, just make sure you iron the seam allowance or use double-sided tape, whatever your preference is. But that's the way we're going to do it. We're just going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from this folded edge with the zipper, and that will complete this part, and then we're on to the last steps. Okay, now, so this is what we have right now. We have this top stitch, so this part's closed off, and this part is opened up. Sorry about that. So now you have to make your choice. Are you binding or birthing? I am binding. I love that contrast. I love the way it looks, so that is my preferred method almost always. If you want to birth, what you're going to do is you are going to take this back panel and you're going to lay it right sides down, and then you will just stitch with the seam allowance all the way around, leaving a hole to birth this pouch. Once you do that stitching, what you will do is you will birth it through this hole, turn it inside out, and then you can just top stitch along the bottom edge to close that up. You could top stitch all the way around, but you probably wouldn't want to because your seams are going to be a little thick around there, and sometimes when you're top stitching over thick seams, it doesn't really look that nice. So what I would do is I would just top stitch along the bottom to close up that gap. So that's how you birth it. If you're going to do like me and you're going to bind, what you're going to do is you're going to take your back and place these wrong sides together. You are going to then clip all the way around. So now I have all my layers clipped. So let's look at them. We have our exterior on the back, right side out, so that's what we would see. We have these two are going to be wrong sides together. Our exterior back and our lining are wrong sides together. And then we also have this front panel. So just open everything up, look at everything, make sure everything looks good, everything makes sense. And then at this point, if everything looks good, baste all the way around with that 1/8 of an inch. Don't worry that things aren't lining up perfectly yet. We will take this over, or you can take this over to your cutting mat. Make sure you square up everything, trim everything perfectly before we add the binding. Now while I'm sewing this, if you notice, I'm holding everything down flat because I want this part to be flat. I don't care if my edges become a little off center because I can trim them up and I'm going to be binding them over. But I want this part to remain flat and smooth so I get that pretty finish at the end. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to my cutting mat, trim everything up, make sure it's a really good, I guess what you call this, rectangle. It's not really a square. So make sure it's a really even rectangle, and then we will come back and attach the binding and finish up. So I have the pouch trimmed up, everything's looking great. I chose my binding. I always keep scrap binding on hand, and so I thought this dark brown would be a great accent. The only thing I'm a little frustrated with is I did cut this one smaller, you know, because it was for a different project, and I needed it a little bit skinnier, so this is a little bit skinnier. This is an inch and a quarter wide. I usually like it a little bit bigger. I like a very thick contrast, so personally, I probably would have done this if I was cutting it new. Would be probably an inch and 3/4. But I didn't have any more of this fabric. I didn't want to waste it, so this is what I'm using. It'll be fine. Since we are mitering corners, which means we're not going around any curves, we do not need to cut this on the bias, so it really doesn't have any stretch at all. If you have ones with bias, you can use that just fine though. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to feed it through my machine this way. I want my binding to be right sides together with my pouch. I'm going to start it by just folding the raw edge under. This is how I will finish my edges. And then I'm just going to place it right there. I'm not going to clip at all. If you've watched previous videos, I've talked a lot about binding and how I like to do mine. I always sew it from my prettiest side, which will be my front. I don't worry as much about the back, but I will show you how I make sure I get a nice finish on the back. It's not hard to do binding, especially when you're not going around curves. This is the simplest way to get your practice. So what I will do is I will sew the binding on with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. I will come and I will sew down, and whenever I'm a 1/4 of an inch away from this corner, I will stop stitching. I will back stitch a few stitches, and then I will break my thread. Whenever I do that, then I will show you that next step, but this is what we'll do first to get started. I won't show every corner because I have so many videos of doing this, but I will show the first corner, and then I will continue on with the binding. Okay, I sewed that first portion. I'm about a 1/4 of an inch away. You can see my binding is right sides together. What I do now is I grab the extra binding in my hand and I'm pulling it to the other side, and so now it is right sides facing me. I want to make that 45-degree angle right there. You can see it's from corner to corner, but also I want it straight across. Let me put a clip in here so I can hold this up to make sure you can see it really clearly, what we're looking at here. So I want that 45-degree angle, but I want the 90-degree straight line right there going back. This is how we start a mitered corner. Once I do that, I put my finger right there at that finished raw edge, and I flip the binding back on top of itself. So now it is once again right sides with my pouch. Take a clip and just place a clip right there. And you can see it's going to be perfectly parallel again. I am not going to start stitching up here. I will start stitching down here with that same 1/4 inch seam allowance and continue stitching on there. This part will remain open so I can turn it and get a really nice corner on there. So let's take it on the machine, put your needle down right here on this edge and start stitching a 1/4 of an inch away until we get to the next corner, and then you will do the same thing. You're going to break your stitches a 1/4 of an inch away and then flip it back. If you have any questions, let me know, but I'm not going to show you every step of this because it would be boring for those of you that already have seen all my other videos with this on there. Okay, now you can see I'm getting close to where we started. I'm going to finish this edge the exact same way I finished the first edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it flat and I'm going to look, and I'm going to, like here's the finish, there's this one, I'm going to come down maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches and make a cut. And then I'm just going to flip this side back. What I like is I like them to kind of meet. So the two edges meet, but they do not overlap. The reason I don't want them to overlap is I don't want any extra bulk there. But if I have them kind of butting up against each other, then it's more evened out and it's a little bit easier to flip. So this is what it looks like at this point. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip all of this over. And the way you do this binding, and this is why I like it longer, you can see it's going to be a struggle for me. I might even have to trim down a little bit. But what I like to do is I flip these edges under and I pull them down. Yeah, it'll work. It just will barely work. And I pull it under to where it just covers those previous stitches I made. So I tuck the ends in and do that. I do that on the straight edges first. I leave the corners for last. When I leave them for last, then they go into place better. I do use clips at this point, so flip all these around. It'll go slow, so I'll speed it up. But I will show you how I do the corners once I get everything all into place. You can see I have it clipped all the way around the edges, and I'm saving these corners for last. Whenever you save them for last, they automatically try to go the way you want them to go. You just make sure you tuck in those raw edges, and then you fold it over itself to create that perfect corner there, and then you will just put a clip right in place there. They kind of want to do it the way you sew it. They kind of want to do the right thing. And so then you just tuck and fold and clip. I will continue doing this. And then what we're going to do, or what I do, is I sew from the right side. A couple of things I tell students whenever I have them in class is you can look down the side of your pouch, look down it, and see if everything looks like it's lining up. But here's the thing. If you sewed with a 1/4 inch seam allowance properly, and then if you fold your binding to where it just goes over that 1/4 of it, those stitches on the back side, which mine is, just barely covering them, when you sew again with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, it's going to catch it. There may be a spot or two that it doesn't. You could either go back and fix that. You could even take a little bit of glue and tuck it in. It's okay, but if you follow that, like, the math adds up. Does that make sense? So take your time with clipping and looking before you go to the machine. And then if you go to the machine when you know that it's already kind of put in place properly, the 1/4 inch seam allowance will catch everything. So I want to finish clipping, and then I'm going to sew it all the way around, and then our pouch will be done. Everything's clipped in place. It's time to sew with that 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is my overlap spot right here. I'm going to start just a little bit below that, so if I have any stretching from the fabric, even though it's not cut on the bias, I could tuck it in there. I usually don't, but just in case. Also, because my binding is shorter than I usually like, width-wise, it's not as wide as I usually like. I might miss a couple spots on this. I'm not too stressed. I can go back and fix it. But just definitely I would go to at least, a 1/4, inch and a half to 1 3/4. I would not do 1 1/4. It's just harder. It just makes it a little bit more stressful when you're sewing it. But anyway, let's go all the way around, 1/4 inch, and then we will be done with our pouch. I'm coming up to my first corner here. I will take out that clip, but I want to make sure that I go past that corner and have them, both the corners underneath my needle, before I pivot to get back on that 1/4 inch seam allowance. If not, it could possibly over time come out where that wasn't stitched down for the mitering of the corner. Okay, my pouch is finished. I just got to trim up some loose threads. The pouch is adorable. It's a perfect way to start using clear vinyl, and it is a great way to use up some scrap materials. Cute gifts. These do sell great at all of my craft shows. People love them, so I tend to make a lot of them to take with me. So try this out. If you make it, let me know. You can tag me on Instagram at Sew Country, or you can find me on Facebook, posting in the groups. I'm in all the groups. I'd love to see yours. Also, check out J&R Edwards. They have a lot of clear vinyl, and they're going to be carrying a lot more. So they have some beautiful designs coming up. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I will be doing a sew along next weekend, so that may be my next video. I'm not for sure yet, but if you have any suggestions for tutorials you want to see, just let me know. Thank you so much, and you guys have a great day sewing.